400 pounds came off that stool like a wall deciding to walk. The floorboards took it. You could feel the boards complain through your own feet, and the smaller man in the black pants didn't move. Didn't blink. The giant covered half the ring in 2 steps, fist already caught back past his ear, and the whole room leaned in for the sound of a body breaking. That sound never came. If you think you know how this story ends, how any Bruce Lee story ends, this is the one that's going to cost you that belief. Because there's a photograph. 1 frame. A man pressed a shutter at exactly the right half second, and then he hid that picture in a drawer for 50 years and never showed a living soul. I sat across from him near the end of his life, and what he finally told me changes the shape of everything I thought I knew. So stick around, all the way to the last frame, because the last frame of this story is the first frame of all the others, and you'll see what I mean when we get there. Let me set the room for you. It's late in the 60s. A gym that doesn't have a name worth remembering, somewhere off the water, the kind of place that smells like rope and old sweat and the iron tang of men who bled on that canvas before. Low ceiling. Bad light, except for the one hard lamp burning straight down over the ring like an interrogation. And packed around it, maybe 60 men in shirt sleeves and loosened ties, because back then a crowd dressed up to watch a man get hurt. You remember the harbor fight? The photographer from that night, the quiet one who never said much, just worked his camera in the corner? He's here again. Same man. Corner of the ring, winding his film, and he doesn't know yet that he's about to take the one picture he'll spend the rest of his life hiding. Now, the giant. His name doesn't matter, and I'll tell you why in a minute. What mattered was the size of him. Better than 400 pounds, near 7 feet, hands like catcher's mitts. He'd been brought in for money. There was cash on a side table, real money, stacked where everyone could see it, and the bet was simple, and it was cruel. The small man could not last 1 round. 3 minutes. That's all. Survived 3 minutes, and the money was his. They'd paid to watch a man get hurt. They didn't know they'd paid to watch one get humble. 3 minutes. Remember that number. We're coming back to it. The giant was loud. That's the thing about that kind. He talked the whole time he crossed the floor. Big rolling laugh, playing to the room, because men that size learn early that noise wins half their fights before a hand is thrown. The crowd loved him for it. They roared. And Bruce just stood there, quiet, front foot turned out maybe an inch, watching. Here's the part most people get wrong. They think the smaller man was calm because he was confident. No. I've stood in that stance with someone twice my weight bearing down, and I'll tell you what your body actually does. It screams at you to back up. Every nerve you own votes to run. Calm isn't the absence of that. Calm is hearing all of it and choosing, in that exact half second, not to obey. That's what the camera caught. But not yet. The first rush came at the bell. The giant didn't box. Men his size don't need to. He came to grab, to fold the little man in half and let gravity finish the job. Both hands open, reaching. And the little man wasn't there. You blinked and the space he'd filled was empty air, and the giant stumbled through it into the ropes, and the room made a sound, not a cheer, something lower, confused. The big man turned around angry now, the laugh gone. He'd swung at a shadow. 2 minutes left. He came again, smarter this time, cutting off the ring, hurting the smaller man toward the corner where size wins. And it almost worked. For 1 second Bruce had nowhere to go, his back 3 feet from the turnbuckle, the giant filling the whole world in front of him. That's where you'd have quit. That's where I'd have covered up and prayed. What does a man see in the half second before the room decides he loses? I've asked myself that for years, because Bruce didn't see a wall. He saw a door. The bigger a man is, the more of him is committed to going forward, and a thing going forward that hard cannot change its mind. Bruce stepped, not back inside the reach, where 400 pounds of momentum couldn't fold or grab, because there wasn't room left to swing. The crowd went quiet. They didn't have words for what they were watching. Neither did the giant. 1 minute. Now here's where I have to slow down, because this is the whole thing in one move, and the photographer knew it. That's why his hand was already on the shutter. The giant threw everything he had left. One punch, the big one, the one that ends nights. And Bruce didn't block it, and he didn't run from it. He turned with it, a half step, the way you'd guide a door closing instead of slamming it, and the giant's own weight, all 400 pounds of it, kept going where the punch was already going. Past Bruce. Down. He didn't get knocked down. That's what nobody believed afterward. Nobody hit him. He fell through the space where a smaller man used to be, and the floor came up and took him, and the boards complained one last time, and then the gym was so quiet you could hear the film advance in the photographer's camera. Click. That's the frame. That's the one he hid for 50 years. But here's the thing, and lean in close, because this is why he never showed it. The picture isn't Bruce standing over a fallen giant. That would have sold 1,000 copies. That's the photo everybody wanted. The frame he caught was the giant's face. The half second after he hit the floor, and before the anger came back. That bare, open, human half second where a man who'd spent his whole life being the biggest thing in every room understood, for the first time, that size had never been the answer. That he'd been wrong about the one thing he'd built his entire life on. And Bruce? Bruce didn't stand over him. He stepped back, gave the man room to get up with what little he had left. Reached down one hand, not in triumph, to help. That's why the photographer hit it. He told me, voice gone thin near the end, I couldn't sell a man his worst second. It wasn't mine to sell. 50 years that picture sat in a drawer, because the one man who could have made a fortune off Bruce Lee decided some things you protect instead. The giant got up, took the hand, didn't take the money, left it on the table, and he walked out of that gym a different size than he walked in, though the scale would have read the same. Here's what it cost me years to understand. We tell these stories like they're about winning, about the small man beating the big one. They're not. The fight was over in under 3 minutes, and Bruce never threw a closed fist. What the camera caught wasn't a victory. It was a mercy. The strongest thing in that room wasn't the 400 pounds. It wasn't even the speed that made it look easy. It was the hand reaching down. A loud man fills a room. A still one empties it. But the rarest man, he's the one who, having emptied it, helps you back to your feet. So that's the last frame. The photographer slid it back in the drawer the day I saw it, careful, like it still mattered which way up it lay. And as he closed it, he said something I haven't shaken since. He said, You want to know where I first heard the name? Years before this. Down by the harbor. There was this fight nobody talks about. And he started at the beginning. Which, I think, is where you and I should go next. I'll see you down by the water. Let me take you back further than the gym. Because to understand what that camera caught, you have to understand the 3 weeks before it. It started with a phone call the photographer almost didn't answer. A man's voice, money in it, the kind of voice that's used to people saying yes. There was a fighter coming through town. Big money behind him, bigger than the fights themselves. And somebody wanted pictures, not for the papers, for themselves. Trophies. The voice said there'd be a show worth photographing. The voice was right, just not the way it meant. Now here's what I want you to sit with. Back then, in those years, a man could make a living being enormous. You didn't need skill if you had size and a mouth. You'd travel town to town, gym to gym, and the pitch was always the same. Put your money down, find me a local boy, watch me break him. And the crowds came. They always came. Because there's something old and ugly in people that wants to watch the big thing crush the small thing. I've coached 40 years, and I've seen that hunger in a room. It doesn't dress up nice. It just wears a suit and buys a ticket. That's the world this giant moved through. And he was good at it. While the photographer was loading his car that first morning, 200 miles away the small man was teaching a lesson nobody filmed. No crowd. No money. Just a handful of students in a bare room, and Bruce showing them the same thing over and over, not how to hit harder. How to not be where the hit lands. The boring thing. The thing nobody pays to see. One man trained to be seen. The other trained to be missed. They were 3 weeks and 200 miles apart, and neither knew the other existed yet. But the road only runs one direction in a story like this. Let me tell you about the giant honestly, because the easy thing, the thing the competition does, is to make him a cartoon. A loud fool who deserves what's coming. That's lazy, and it's a lie, and it cheats you out of the real story. He wasn't a fool. Cruel, yes, when the money was up. But underneath the noise, there was a frightened man who'd learned, young, that the world only had one use for someone his size. He'd been the biggest kid in every room since he was 12. People feared him before he ever raised a hand, and a boy learns fast that fear is the closest thing to respect he's going to get. So he leaned into it, built his whole life on it, brick by brick, until the size wasn't just his body, it was his entire idea of who he was. That's the part you need, because it's the part that makes the ending land. When you build your whole self on one thing, you can't afford to ever find out that one thing isn't enough. The bigger the wall, the more terrified the man behind it. Remember that? We're coming back to that wall. There was a man in that gym who didn't believe a word of it. I want you to meet him, because he's how I know this story is true. He was a fight man. Old hands, busted knuckles, the kind who'd seen everything twice and believed in exactly two things: weight and reach. He'd come that night because a friend dragged him, and he'd put his own money down, on the giant, of course. He told me, years later, sitting across a diner table with coffee going cold between us, I'd watched 1,000 fights. I knew how this ended before the little fella stepped through the ropes. I'd have bet my house. Hold on to him. The man who'd remember it best wasn't even fighting. And the moment his whole world flipped, that's the moment I trust most in this entire story, because a skeptic doesn't lie about being wrong. It cost him too much. So, the night. I told you about the bell, about the first rush, about the giant grabbing at air. Let me slow it down now, because the competition would show you a highlight reel. I want to show you a clock. 3 minutes. That was the bet. Survive 3 minutes. The first 30 seconds, the giant played. That's the word for it, played. He'd done this 100 times, and 100 times the local boy had frozen, and fear does half the work. He expected the freeze. He came in lazy, almost bored, reaching the way you'd reach for something already yours. And the small man slipped him. Clean. No drama. Just gone. The crowd laughed at the giant. First time all night. And I want you to understand what that does to a man who's built his entire self on being feared. That laugh went into him like a splinter. The lazy went out of his eyes. 2.5 minutes. Now he meant it. Now he came forward like weather, cutting the ring smaller, using the size the way he knew how, not to hit, to trap. Herd the small man into a corner where quick doesn't matter, where there's nowhere left to slip. And it worked. I told you it almost worked. For one held breath, Bruce had his back near the ropes, and 400 pounds closing the door. What does a man see in the half second before the room decides he loses? The skeptic told me he stood up at that moment. Couldn't help it. Everybody did. Because they all saw the same thing. The little fellow was cooked. Wall behind him, mountain in front. I opened my mouth to yell, he said. I don't even know what. And then I never got the word out. Because Bruce didn't go back. He went in. Here's the part most people get wrong, so listen close. When a thing that big commits forward, it's spent. All that weight is a promise it can't take back. Bruce read the promise and stepped inside it, close, too close, chest to chest where 400 pounds of momentum had nothing to grab and nowhere to land. The corner that was supposed to be his grave became the one place the size couldn't reach him. Strength filled that room. Precision emptied it. The giant froze. First time all night, the big man didn't know what to do, and you could see the question cross his face like a cloud. What is happening to me? 1 minute. And now the room changed. The laughing stopped. The skeptic was on his feet with his bet forgotten in his fist. 60 men in loosened ties leaning toward a thing they didn't have words for, because the story they'd paid to see was running backward in front of them, and nobody had told the small man he was supposed to lose. The giant did what frightened men do when the wall starts to crack. He swung for the kill. Everything he had, all of it, the punch that had ended 100 nights in 100 towns. This is where the photographer's thumb was already down on the shutter, because he'd been shooting fights for 20 years, and something in his gut told him, this one. Now. And Bruce didn't block it. Didn't run. He turned with it. A half step. A guide, the way you'd ease a slamming door instead of catching it. And the giant's own weight, all of it, every pound he'd built his life on, kept going exactly where it was already headed. Past the small man. Toward the floor. Nobody hit him. I need you to hear that, because the skeptic still says it like he's defending himself in court. Nobody touched him. I was 8 feet away. The little fella never closed his fist the whole night. The big man fell through a hole where somebody used to be standing. And the boards complained one last time, the way I told you. And the gym went so quiet, you could hear film advance in a camera. Click. Same room. Same lights. Different ending than anyone in it had paid for. Now, the frame. Here's where I have to be careful, because this is the whole thing. And if I rush it, I cheat you. Everybody in that gym expected the same photograph, and it's the same when the competition would sell you. The conquering hero. Small man standing over fallen giant, fist up, crowd roaring. That photo would have sold 10,000 copies. That's the photo the man with money in his voice had paid for. That's not the frame he caught. The frame he caught was the giant's face. The half second after the floor took him and before the anger came back to cover it. That naked, open, terrible half second where a man who had spent his entire life being the biggest thing in every room finally understood it had never been enough. The wall he'd built brick by brick since he was 12 years old came down in one frame, and behind it was just a frightened kid who'd been told his whole life that size was love. That's a man's worst second. Caught forever. Lit like a confession. And Bruce? The competition would have him standing over the man, soaking the room. He didn't. He stepped back. Gave the giant the floor, the room, the air to put himself back together. And then, this is the part the skeptic's voice always broke on, Bruce reached down one hand. Not a fist. Not a flag. An open hand. To help the bigger man up. That's when I sat back down, the old skeptic told me, coffee stone cold by then. Not when he won. When he reached down. I'd bet my house against that little fella, and I'd have been glad to lose it. 40 years I've tried to explain what I saw, and the closest I can get is, I came to watch a man get broken, and I watched one get put back together instead. Now you understand why the photographer hid the frame. He could have sold it. The man with money still wanted his trophy. But the photographer looked at what he caught, not a victory, a man's worst and most human second, and something in him said no. It wasn't mine to sell, he told me, voice gone to paper near the end of his life. You don't make a living off a man's worst second. I caught it. That meant I had to protect it. And he slid it into a drawer, and there it stayed for 50 years, while the world told other versions of that night, louder ones, falser ones, and the one man who had the proof said nothing, because some kinds of silence are a form of respect. The giant got up, took the hand. You knew he would somewhere, didn't you? But let me tell you what he did next, because it's the part that isn't in any version. He didn't take the money. Left it stacked on the table where everyone could see it, walked past it, out into the night. And the man with money in his voice never got his trophy, and never called the photographer again. Where the giant went after that, what he made of the rest of his life, that's a story for another night. The photographer knew. He told me, and it's better than you think. Here's what it cost me years to understand, and I'll give it to you straight the way a coach gives it to you after the room's emptied out. We tell these stories like they're about winning, the small beating the big. They're not. The whole thing was over in under 3 minutes, and Bruce never once closed his fist. What that camera caught wasn't a victory, it was a mercy. The strongest thing in that gym was never the 400 pounds. It wasn't even the speed that made it look like nothing. It was the open hand at the end. Anybody can knock a man down. It takes something rarer to refuse to stand on him once he's there. A loud man fills a room. A still one empties it. But the rarest man of all, having emptied it, reaches down and helps you back onto your feet. So that's the frame the world didn't see for 50 years. I held it in my own hands, near the end, in a quiet room that smelled of old paper and old coffee. And when the photographer slid it back into the drawer, careful, like it still mattered which way up it lay, he said a thing I haven't been able to shake since. He said, "You want to know where I first heard the name? Years before any of this. Down by the harbor. There was a fight nobody talks about. No money, no crowd. Just two men in the water and something I've never been able to explain." And the old man smiled, and he started at the beginning. Which, I think, is exactly where you and I should go next. Pull your chair up by the water. I'll meet you there.